Welcome back. As a $32 billion industry, human trafficking is now the third largest criminal enterprise, just trailing behind the illegal drug trade and arms dealing. It might shock many of you to know that human slavery is not just an issue for the developing world. America has a significant problem with it, and we're discussing the implications and potential solutions with Ambassador Luis de Baca, Director of the Office to Monitor and Combat Trafficking in Persons at the U.S. State Department, where he serves as Senior Advisor to the Secretary. In the studio, I have Ron Sodalta, lecturer and author of several articles on the slave trade, both historic and modern day, and Kevin Bales, president of Free the Slaves, based here in Washington, D.C. Ron and Kevin are the co-authors of The Slave Next Door, Human Trafficking and Slavery in America. As we get back to our discussion, Anwar in the UK was asking about why the government can't do more to stop the access, I guess, and you have an idea on this.
Well, in fact, Anwar asked sort of two related questions. One was about the education levels of the people who are potentially enslaved. And of course, I just have to say that all the work demonstrates that education is a very powerful preventative against people being caught up in human trafficking. If they understand the issues, they understand the lures, they understand the tricks that are played, it helps them. So one of the things governments need to do is to help raise public awareness and education levels. Now, the other part of his question was about why aren't governments doing more? And the answer is, in many ways, governments have been coming to this issue over the last 10 years almost from a place of just beginning. And the funding is growing, the resources are increasing, but they're nowhere near what's needed to solve the problem.
And some are in denial. We were discussing before the show started, 12.3 million, the ILO figure that I quoted, is generally not accepted. It's much higher, isn't it?
Almost everyone agrees who works in the field that it's about 27 million people in the world in slavery, but we know that there are a couple of governments that refuse to provide real figures to the ILO for that report.
Ron, it's an interesting thing that in 2010, the US is going to focus for the first time on itself, a real look at the situation here. And I guess it's a great thing, as the ambassador was saying at the beginning, the US wants to work as a partner with other countries. You know, this idea that it's trying to hide anything, it's not the case though, is it?
No, it's really not. We have been evaluating clearly other countries on an annual basis in our Trafficking in Persons report. And well, the reason behind this book, for example, when Kevin and I got together and decided to do it, it was so that we could essentially hold up a mirror to the American people to develop a self-awareness, to let Americans know that this exists in our country as well as in the rest of the world. And the fact that that the government is going to be instituting a policy of self-analysis and self-awareness formally is a tremendous thing. And as Kevin was saying earlier, the only better step that could possibly be taken is letting other countries evaluate us. And that's got to be coming as well.
Well, a caller from Virginia, Nikki on the line. Go ahead, Nikki.
Yes, good afternoon. My question is, how can NGOs, non-profit organizations, get involved with the government in order to help them educate these victims?
Ambassador, could I put that to you, sir?
Well, I think there's a number of ways. One of them for people here in the Washington, D.C. area is that in both Northern Virginia and in Washington, D.C., there's a very active anti-trafficking task force. Here in D.C., the local U.S. Attorney's Office, Roy Austin, who prosecuted these cases with me at the Civil Rights Division, is working every day with the non-governmental organizations, and everything from domestic U.S. Prostituted children to people who feel that they may have been abused by their employer as a servant. And right here in the D.C. area, there's an opportunity to not just work on the issue as an advocate, but also to do hands-on work helping the people who are coming out of slavery as they make their journey. People need clothes, people need food, people need folks who can help them translate day-to-day life here in the United States. But at the end of the day, I think it requires an advocacy movement. It requires an informed population in the U.S. and abroad who can hold us in government accountable. The Obama administration cares about this, as you mentioned at the beginning of the show, but at the end of the day, the way that resources get allocated in government is because the members of Congress and others know that people in their own districts care about modern slavery and want them to do something.
Ambassador, a quick question to you that's just come in from our live station chat room where people are online talking about this from around the world. One from Steeple Aston, New York. What is the prosecution rate? Of those prosecuted, what percentage are convicted? Of those convicted, how many actually are punished?
In the United States, the prosecution rate is on par with the other criminal civil rights crimes. So we compare the human trafficking numbers to the police brutality and the racial violence cases that are prosecuted by the federal government. But at the end of the day, that's still only around 100 a year. who are being prosecuted. We can do better and we can do more. In the United States, most law enforcement is actually done at the local and state level. The 16,000 murders that occur each year in the United States, those aren't prosecuted by federal prosecutors. Those are prosecuted by the district attorney there in New York or otherwise. And that's what we have to do to really get a handle on these cases, is to get the local prosecutors, the local police, uncovering trafficking and bringing these guys to justice.
Right. Kevin, you wanted to add to that, did you?
Well, Lou's absolutely right. We've got to get the local level going, but we also have to make sure that the resources are flowing from the center to support those local prosecutors, because the 17,000 that the government says are flowing into the country to be enslaved each year is almost the same as the murder rate in this country, about 17,000. But the clear-up rate for murder is about 70% in the United States. Depending on how you figure it, the clear-up rate for slavery is somewhere around 3% or less.
Let me throw something to you here, Kevin, that came in from Facebook from a viewer by the name, well, uses the handle Falky8773. Eliminate poverty and safeguard women's rights. Problem solved. Is it as simple as that?
Probably not, but those would be very important. The key predictor of slavery and trafficking in any country statistically is always corruption. Issues of corruption, and after that, then poverty, and women's rights are very important. One of the things that we've discovered, which is very exciting, though, is if you stop slavery, particularly in parts of the developing world, you begin to turn around poverty, and you also protect women's rights.
I think one of the things that I would add to that is, if you look at the United States as far as our own civil rights history, it took the Roosevelt administration working with the NAACP to actually prosecute what we would now call traffickers, the people who were holding African Americans in slavery on the fields as late as the 1940s. It was only once the laws were changed to get people out of what the sharecropping system, debt bondage, that the African American community was able to make gains in education, housing, voting, all of the other things that we think of as core civil rights values. So that notion of fight slavery first, and then you can actually have a human rights impact.
And Ron, a thought here from a Facebook question that came from Kiran Shah, who wrote in saying, human trafficking is a serious matter in Latin America and the US. The media is a key player in hiding or not exposing the truth. What more can the media do?
In point of fact, Riz, I'm not sure that's exactly the case. What a lot of us do is go online to Google and to their news alerts and hit human trafficking. When you do that, you find that there are actually news articles throughout the country about trafficking and slavery in America, what's being done, what hasn't been done, as well as in the rest of the world. So it's not so much that the news media isn't paying attention to it. I think it is a case of looking at an article and not realizing what you're looking at.
That's what I'm wondering.
I think the big issue is awareness. It has to be made very clear. And going back to what Lou and Kevin were saying, I think there's a tendency to look to our leaders for salvation, if you will, whereas in point of fact, it's up to the American people to create an agenda, to create a drive and a need to address this issue and make it as a constituency something that our representatives and our government are absolutely obligated to do. It's up to us to do it, and we can't do it without that level of awareness.
Well, of course, I think it'll help with the book highlighting some of these stories, and there's some pretty horrific stories in there illustrating how strong some of these are. Gentlemen, I want to thank you all for taking part. Ambassador, thank you also for being with us for this debate.
Thank you, Riz.
It's been great to be here.
Thank you for having us.
Thank you. Thank you for sending in your questions. On the next show, one of the biggest surprises of the recent European elections was the success of a Swedish candidate under the banner of internet piracy. We speak to the leader of the party and an artist who says artists are suffering immensely because of piracy. Send in your questions from me and the team. We'll see you next time.